Karen Whitmore believed in two things: tidy lawns and personal responsibility. That's why every morning, just after 7, she slipped on her clean white sneakers, zipped up her windbreaker with the HOA logo stitched on the chest, and walked the sidewalks of Willow Bend with purpose. In one hand, she carried a travel mug of herbal tea. In the other, her clipboard, laminated, labeled, and color-coded with notes from every home visit she'd ever made. Her neighbors had come to expect her presence. She didn't exactly knock on doors, but she definitely lingered near them. If a porch light was left on after sunrise, Karen noticed. Karen noticed. If a trash bin was visible from the curb, she wrote it down. It wasn't personal. To Karen, it was simply about keeping the neighborhood presentable. That morning, as she strolled past the houses lining Magnolia Court, something stopped her. Lot 18. She tilted her head and narrowed her eyes. The house wasn't new, but something about it looked different. She stepped onto the sidewalk in front of the driveway and took another sip of tea. Then she saw it, a new welcome mat. It was dark blue, bold yellow lemons, and the words "Squeeze the Day" printed in a cheerful script. Karen blinked slowly. She hadn't approved that mat. She would have remembered lemons. She took a step closer, then another. On the porch, a hanging plant swayed slightly in the breeze. Lavender, very fragrant, very purple. She didn't recall signing off on that either. She flipped back to pages in her clipboard and found the last notes she'd taken for Lot 18. Back then, the porch had a black and white striped mat and a small succulent. What changed? Karen moved closer to the front door as she approached. She noticed another detail. The curtain inside the front window was slightly pulled back, as if someone had just peeked out. She paused, her curiosity now fully activated. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her ring of keys. There were 10 in total. She'd labeled them years ago with tiny red stickers and etched tiny numbers on the sides. Over the years, she had convinced herself these were the keys that unlocked nearly every gate shed or a front door in the neighborhood given to her by a former board president who had since moved to Florida. It made her feel helpful. Essential, she selected the key she believed belonged to Lot 18 and gently slipped it into the lock. It didn't turn. Karen frowned. She tried another and another. Still nothing. Her fingers tightened around the keyring. She gave the lock a light jiggle. It remained still, almost stubborn. She took a step back and stared at the door as if it had personally insulted her. That's odd, she thought. These used to work. She looked around again. The house seemed so quiet. The car in the driveway looked unfamiliar. A dusty blue sedan, definitely not the sleek black SUV the owner usually drove. Her mind raced with possibilities. Maybe someone was renting the place. Maybe they'd swapped the lock to keep something secret. Or worse, maybe someone had moved in without telling anyone. Karen's heart pounded with purpose. She reached for her phone with calm certainty. She dialed. Yes. Hello, she said, glancing at the porch as if it might eavesdrop. Here at one of the homes in my neighborhood, and I believe something might be off. The lock doesn't match the key, and I suspect someone may be inside who shouldn't be. I think you should send someone to check. She hung up slowly and stared at the door as if waiting for it to give her an explanation. The wind stirred the lavender plant. Karen didn't flinch. Something strange was happening at Lot 18, and she was going to get to the bottom of it. Karen stood on the porch, phone still warm in her hand after the call. The lock refused to budge under her repeated attempts. She glanced around the quiet street. The neighbors were all still indoors, and the morning sun was just starting to stretch over the rooftops. Nothing looked out of place, yet Karen's gut told her otherwise. She tried another key from her rinky number 7. She'd always thought this one was the one for Lot 18. She inserted it gently, turning it slowly like a surgeon performing a delicate procedure. But no, the key stuck halfway. then refused to turn any further. Karen tugged it back out, inspecting the teeth of the key. Nothing looked damaged. The lock itself looked pristine. A small sigh escaped her lips. What in the world? ... Mind raced. Could someone have changed the locks without telling the HOA? It wouldn't be the first time something unusual had happened on Magnolia Court. Still, Karen believed in following the rules. And if someone was making secret changes, that was a problem. She looked up and down the street once more, then down. At the door. She tried another key number 3 this time. This one had always worked on one of the storage sheds nearby. But maybe she'd gotten them mixed up. The key slipped in easily, but failed to turn at all. Karen's fingers tapped anxiously against the doorframe. She pulled out her phone again, scrolling through the HOA group chat to check if anyone else had mentioned any changes at Lot 18. Nothing, just the usual chatter about yard sales and dog walking schedules. She stared at the lock again. What if someone was inside and this was a sign? Karen's mind filled with all kinds of what-if scenarios. Maybe a family emergency. Or worse, maybe someone had moved in who wasn't supposed to be there. She took a deep breath and, against her better judgment, jiggled the keys one last time in the lock. No luck. Karen straightened her shoulders. She tapped the screen of her phone and hit 911 once more. Hello, this is Karen Whitmore from Willow Bend. She said to the dispatcher, trying to keep her voice steady but firm. I'm at 18 Magnolia Court. I've been trying to get inside with my HOA keys, but none of them are working. I think the locks might have been changed. I'm concerned that someone may be inside without permission, or that something is amiss. Could you please send an officer to check on the house? I'm standing right outside. Of course, ma'am, the dispatcher replied smoothly. We'll send someone over as soon as possible. Karen hung up, her heart pounding louder than the morning birds. This wasn't how she wanted to spend her day, but she was convinced. She was doing the right thing. Neighborhood safety was no joke. After all, moments later, Karen paced slowly back and forth on the sidewalk, watching the empty street. She noticed a gentle breeze moving the leaves of the tall oak trees lining the road. The street lamps flickered off as the sun climbed higher. Then, suddenly, the front door creaked open. Karen spun around and squinted into the bright morning light. Standing in the doorway was a teenage boy, about 17 or 18 years old, with messy brown hair and a casual smile. He wore a faded t-shirt, jeans, and earbuds hanging loosely around his neck. In one hand, he held a smoothie. He blinked at Karen as if the whole scene were some sort of bizarre waking dream. Hi, he said casually, still holding the door. Can I help you? Karen's mouth tightened. Who are you? I live here, the boy replied, not missing a beat. Eli Hartley. Karen raised an eyebrow. You're sure? Pretty sure, Eli said with a grin. Other. Of town this weekend, so it's just me. Karen looked him over, still suspicious. I was trying to check on things here. The lock didn't work for me. Eli chuckled and took a sip of his smoothie. Yeah, we changed the lock last month. The old one was falling apart. Karen glanced back at her keys. That wasn't authorized, though. Eli shrugged. Mom said it was for safety. If there's a problem, you can talk to her when she gets back. Karen opened her mouth, but before she could say anything else, she heard a car pull up at the end of the street. The flashing blue and red lights made her heart skip a beat. The officer was here. The flashing lights of the police cruiser reflected softly off the windows of the houses on Magnolia Court. Officer Ramirez stepped out of the car, his expression calm but alert. He's been with the department for nearly 8 years and was used to all sorts of calls, but this one about a potential unauthorized occupant sounded like a classic neighborhood misunderstanding. Karen waved him over immediately, eager to explain. Officer, thank goodness you're here. I'm Karen Whitmore, the neighborhood HOA liaison. I was trying to get into 18 Magnolia Court with my keys, but none of them worked. Oh, the lock's been changed without notice. I thought maybe someone Was inside who shouldn't be? Officer Ramirez nodded politely. All right, ma'am, let's take a look. Karen stepped aside and motioned toward the open door where the teenager, Eli, was still standing. He had set his smoothie on the porch railing and removed one earbud, looking as if he was more interested in the morning breeze than any drama. Is this the boy who lives here? The officer asked, smiling at Eli. That's me, Eli said, stepping forward with a relaxed confidence. What's the problem? Officer Ramirez pulled out his notebook and flipped it open. Just making sure everything's all right. I heard there might have been some concern about the lock being changed. Eli nodded. Yeah, we changed it last month. The old lock was getting loose. My mom said safety first. Karen pursed her lips. But you didn't tell the HOA, and you didn't have the old key ready. Eli shrugged. Mom handles that stuff. I was just told to be home this weekend. The officer turned to Karen. Do you have an ID, Eli? Eli pulled out his wallet and flipped it open. Here you go. Officer Ramirez glanced at the school ID card, a photo of Eli with his name and the school's logo. Thank you, Eli. And do you live here alone? Just me, this weekend. My mom's visiting her sister out of town, Eli replied. Karen stepped forward, her voice a little sharp, but trying to keep calm. I just want to make sure everything is in order. It's important for the neighborhood to know who's in our homes. Eli smiled faintly. Get it? I'm probably not what you expected. The officer chuckled softly. It's not unusual for teenagers to be home alone for a few days. As long as everything's safe and secure, there's no problem. Karen glanced around the porch nervously, her earlier confidence fading. She watched as Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I have the doorbell camera footage from this morning, said, holding up the device. I can show you the whole thing. You'll see me answering the door and you trying all your keys. Karen's cheeks flushed. I didn't know you were recording. Eli shrugged again. Everyone does these days. It helps with neighborhood safety too. Officer Ramirez raised an eyebrow. Would you mind showing me the footage, Eli? Eli tapped on his screen and handed the phone over. The video showed Karen approaching the door, trying several keys in the lock with increasing frustration. She then pulled out her phone and made a call. Then the door opened and Eli stepped into view. Calm and collected with his smoothie in hand, Karen watched herself on the screen. A little stunned. Officer Ramirez looked up and said kindly, Seems like there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. The locks were changed, but everything else appears normal. There's no sign of a break-in or any suspicious activity. Karen nodded slowly, still a little flustered. I suppose I jumped to conclusions. Eli grinned. It's okay. Just care a lot about the neighborhood. Karen gave a tight smile but didn't say more. The officer smiled at both of them. Well, if there's nothing else, I'll let you get on with your day. Karen, please be sure to communicate with the homeowners if you ever have concerns in the future. It'll save everyone a lot of trouble. Karen nodded, this time with genuine understanding. I will. Thank you, officer. As the cruiser pulled away, Karen stood on the porch, looking at the house from a new perspective. She realized maybe things were changing in ways she hadn't kept up with. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to listen a little more. Eli picked up his smoothie and smiled at her. No hard feelings. Karen nodded again. No hard feelings. They both shared a quiet moment before Karen turned and walked back to the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, but a little less certain than before. The morning sun had fully risen, casting warm light on Magnolia Court as Officer Ramirez walked up the steps of 18 Magnolia Court. Karen followed closely behind, still holding her clipboard like it was a shield, while Eli stood casually by the door, smoothie in hand. Clearly unbothered by the attention, Officer Ramirez gave Karen a polite nod. Ma'am, do you want to come inside or should I speak with? Eli out here? Karen hesitated, then shook her head. I'll wait here, thank you. But I'd appreciate a little more clarity about the lock situation. Eli stepped aside and gestured toward the entrance. Sure, come on in. My mom set up the security cameras, so I'm guessing we can check those if you want. The officer and Karen followed Eli into the modest living room. The walls were decorated with family photos, a mix of candid moments and school events. It was warm, lived in, and decidedly normal. Eli tapped on a tablet on the side table. Here's the Ring app. We get video clips of anyone who rings the doorbell or passes by. Officer Ramirez nodded, impressed. That's helpful, Eli. Scrolled through the timeline and selected the clip from earlier that morning. The video showed Karen approaching the door, jiggling keys, and finally pulling out her phone to call 911. Then it showed the door opening and Eli stepping outside with a relaxed smile. Karen watched the clip on the screen, biting her lip. She didn't like seeing herself look flustered. But there was no denying the footage was clear. Officer Ramirez looked at Karen and said, "From what I see here, everything checks out. No signs of forced entry or anything unusual. The lock change was a homeowner decision, which is their right." Karen folded her arms but didn't respond immediately. Instead, she glanced over at Eli, who was leaning casually against the wall. "Have you spoken to your mom about this?" Karen asked. "Not yet," Eli said, "but she told me to keep an eye on things and to handle anything unusual. Guess that means me." Karen felt a twinge of respect for the boy's calm attitude. It was easy to forget that sometimes younger people handled these situations better than the adults. Officer Ramirez closed the tablet and turned back to Karen. "I appreciate you looking out for the neighborhood. But it's important to remember that not every change needs immediate action. A conversation with the homeowner first usually helps." Karen nodded slowly, considering the officer's words. "I suppose I got a bit ahead of myself." "That's understandable," the officer replied. "Want to make sure the neighborhood is safe. But sometimes a little patience goes a long way." Karen looked at Eli and smiled faintly. "Thank you for being patient with all of this." Eli shrugged. "It's no problem. I get why you care." At that moment, Karen's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from the HOA group chat. Someone had posted a link to a video titled, "HOA Karen tries every key, calls 911 for no reason." She hesitated, then clicked on it. The video showed her early morning attempts with the keys, the phone call, and Eli calmly answering the door. She sighed. "Well, I suppose the neighborhood has already seen this." Eli smiled gently. "It's okay. Sometimes things get out there faster than you expect." Karen closed the video and looked up. "I might have to rethink how I do things around here, officer." Ramirez chuckled. "That sounds like a good plan." Karen glanced at her clipboard, then at the open front door. For once, she didn't feel the need to write anything down. "Thank you both," she said, turning to leave. As Karen stepped out, Eli waved goodbye. Officer Ramirez gave a small salute before heading back to his cruiser. Karen walked down the sidewalk slowly, her mind buzzing with new thoughts. Maybe being part of the neighborhood was more about listening and less about controlling. Maybe it was time to open the door figuratively, at least, and see things from a different perspective. By the time Karen had retreated from 18 Magnolia Court, the morning had fully settled into a warm, bright day. But the story wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. Eli sat back down on his front porch steps, pulled out his phone, and smiled as he reread a text from his friend Max. It said simply, "Dude, that video is gold. Can't stop laughing." Eli chuckled quietly and tapped the screen. Earlier that morning, after the police had left, Eli had downloaded a clip from his doorbell camera, the exact moment Karen tried every key in frustration before making her call. He'd trimmed the clip, added a short caption, and uploaded it to a popular social media site where local neighborhoods groups shared news and laughs. The title read, "When Someone Thinks Your House Is Hers." Within an hour, the views started climbing. By lunchtime, hundreds of people had seen it. By the evening, it was nearing 50,000. Comments poured in, some teasing Karen playfully, others praising Eli's calm response, and a few joking about the great key mystery of Magnolia Court. One user even added a smoothie emoji in honor of Eli's cool-headedness. Eli sat back, scrolling through the comments. Some were funny, like, "Next time, just try the pineapple key." Others were surprisingly kind. "Karen just cares a lot." We all do. But Eli handled it like a pro. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from his mom. "Saw the video. Is proud of how you stayed calm. Let's talk tonight." Eli smiled wider. Across town, Karen was also feeling the ripple effects. After returning home, she had logged onto her own social media account, mostly to catch up on neighborhood news. When she saw the video, her first reaction was surprise, then embarrassment. The clip was short but clear. Her determined attempts with the keys, the call to 911, and the door finally opening to reveal Eli with his smoothie. She watched herself on screen, realizing how flustered she had looked. Her dedication to the neighborhood, her vigilance, all laid out for hundreds to see. For a moment, she considered responding with a comment. Maybe explain, maybe apologize. But instead, she closed the app and took a deep breath. Karen wasn't the kind of person to give up easily, but she was the kind who could learn. And this was a lesson wrapped in a smoothie-carrying teenager's calm smile. The next day, the weekly neighborhood meeting, the energy was different. Instead of the usual mix of complaints and passive agreements, there was laughter. People brought up the video and joked about the mysterious master key. Karen entered the room cautiously, clutching her clipboard but without the usual determination in her eyes as she took her seat. A neighbor whispered, "Saw your video. Classic." Karen smiled a little sheepishly. "I guess I was a bit too eager this time." Eli, who had come along with his mom, sat nearby. When Karen caught his eye, she nodded in a quiet acknowledgement. Later, as the meeting wrapped up, a few neighbors came over to chat with Eli. Someone asked if he would help update the community website. Maybe add a FAQ section about keys and locks. Another offered to help with tech support for the new security cameras. Eli laughed and accepted. "I'm happy to help." Karen watched the exchange and felt a warm shift inside. This wasn't about control or confrontation anymore. It was about community, real, imperfect, and alive. That evening, Karen sat by her window, sipping tea, and thought about the day's events. Maybe it was time to trade her master key for a little more understanding. And maybe, just maybe, the neighborhood would be better for it. Karen sat at her kitchen table that evening, the soft glow of the lamp casting gentle shadows across the room. Her clipboard lay untouched beside her, and for once, the usual weight of responsibility felt lighter. She sipped her chamomile tea slowly, pondering the events of the past day. Just then, the front door opened and her son Jason stepped inside, carrying his backpack and a confident smile. "Hey, Mom," he greeted, dropping his bag by the stairs. "Heard about your little adventure on Magnolia Court?" Karen chuckled softly, setting her cup down. "I suppose it was quite the story." Jason pulled up a chair and sat across from her, his eyes bright. "I saw the video. Honestly, handled it with more grace than most people would have." Karen shook her head, a hint of embarrassment showing. I don't know about that. I made a fuss, called the police, and turned into a neighborhood spectacle." Jason grinned. "Sometimes, it's those moments that make us human. Besides, you cared enough to act. That's what counts." Karen smiled, appreciating his kindness. "True, but I could have handled things differently. I didn't consider how the homeowners might feel about surprise visits or lock changes." Jason nodded thoughtfully. "That's the tricky part about community living, balancing rules with respect. It's a dance. You have to listen more than you speak." Karen leaned back in her chair, absorbing his words. "You always have a way of cutting to the heart of things." Jason shrugged. "It's what I do. Look, why not reach out to Eli and his mom? KB apologized for the misunderstanding and offer to work together. Building bridges is better than burning them." Karen considered this. "You're right. It would show the neighborhood that I'm willing to listen and grow. Jason smiled warmly. Exactly. Plus, it might even turn that viral video into something positive for the community. Karen laughed softly. From viral sensation to community project leader. Who would have thought? Jason stood up, stretching. If you want, I can help you draft a message or even join the next HOA meeting. 2 heads are better than 1. She nodded gratefully. I'd like that. Thank you. Jason winked. Anytime, Mom. Sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective. As he gathered his things to leave, Karen felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her son's words had reminded her that being part of a neighborhood wasn't about control or authority. It was about understanding, patience, and the willingness to grow. Later that night, Karen drafted a thoughtful message to Eli's family, expressing her regret for the misunderstanding and her desire to work together for the neighborhoods. Well, she hit send with a hopeful heart. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a reply from Eli's mom. Thank you for reaching out. We appreciate it and look forward to working with you. Karen smiled, feeling the first true connection she'd made in a long time, with Jason's advice and Eli's openness. She realized that the neighborhood wasn't just a place with rules, it was a community where people lived, learned, and grew together, and that was a key worth holding on to. The following week, the atmosphere at the HOA meeting was noticeably warmer. Karen arrived with her son Jason by her side, both carrying folders filled with notes and ideas. The usual stiff formality of the room had softened, replaced by a more collaborative energy. As Karen took her seat, Eli's mom, Mrs. Hartley, greeted her with a genuine smile. Eli was there too, looking more at ease than before. Karen began by addressing the group. I want to thank everyone for coming today, especially those who watched the video and reached out afterward. I've spent some time reflecting on the events and I realized that communication is key, pun intended. A few chuckles broke the ice. Karen continued in light of that. Jason and I have put together some suggestions to help improve communication between homeowners and the HOA, especially when it comes to things like lock changes or property updates. Our goal is to foster trust and prevent misunderstandings. Jason took over, projecting confidence as he presented a plan for a digital community portal. Would allow homeowners to submit updates, share documents, and receive real-time notifications about neighborhood news. It's secure, easy to use, and designed to bring everyone closer. Several neighbors nodded in agreement. One resident raised a question about privacy concerns, which Jason addressed with thoughtful reassurance. The conversation was respectful, engaged, and productive. Mrs. Hartley then stood up and shared her perspective. We appreciate Karen's openness and willingness to connect. It's not always easy to admit when things go sideways, but this is a great step forward. I'm excited to help spread the word about the new portal and encourage participation. Eli added, and I'd like to volunteer to help with the technical setup and maintenance. It's a way I can contribute to the neighborhood and make sure everyone feels included. Karen smiled warmly. Thank you, Eli. That means a lot. The meeting wrapped up with a sense of accomplishment. People lingered to chat, exchanging ideas and plans for upcoming neighborhood events. For the first time in a while, the community felt genuinely united as Karen and Jason packed up their things. Mrs. Hartley approached. I'm glad we're moving forward together, she said sincerely. Karen nodded. Me too. It's a new chapter for all of us. Outside, Eli and Jason talked animatedly about tech ideas and neighborhood improvements. Karen watched them with a quiet pride, grateful for their youthful energy and fresh perspectives. Later that evening, Karen sat on her porch, reflecting on how much things had changed in just a few days. From a tense morning of locked doors and 911 calls to a community brainstorming session filled with hope had been quite a journey. She looked down at her keys resting on the table, then back up at the street. The quiet neighborhood felt different. Now, more alive, more connected. Karen realized that sometimes opening a door wasn't just about keys or locks. It was about opening hearts and minds, and that was the kind of access everyone deserved. The days following the HOA meeting felt different to Karen. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't just the neighborhood enforcer or the keeper of the rules. She was part of something bigger, a community that was willing to listen, learn, and grow. The new digital portal, spearheaded by Jason and Eli, quickly gained traction. Homeowners began posting updates about upcoming events, maintenance notices, and even casual invites to weekend barbecues. The once formal, sometimes tense HOA meetings became informal gatherings with shared laughter and genuine connection. Karen found herself embracing this new rhythm. She no longer saw her role as simply policing the neighborhood, but as helping build bridges and foster trust. The incident with Eli's lock had become a turning point, one that reminded her how easy it was to jump to conclusions, and how rewarding it was to open the door to understanding. One afternoon, Karen was walking her usual route along Magnolia Court when she noticed a group of kids playing near the park. Among them was Eli, effortlessly organizing a game and making sure everyone had a role. She smiled, thinking back to the morning she had first knocked on his door. The memory of frustration had softened into something lighter, almost fond. Karen waved and Eli jogged over, still catching his breath. "Hey, Karen, want to join us for a game?" Shh, she laughed. "I don't know if I can keep up with you kids." Eli grinned. "You might surprise yourself." Just then, Jason appeared, carrying a box of lemonade. "Looks like you two are about to start a neighborhood championship." Karen took the lemonade gratefully and looked around. The street, the neighbors, the families, it all felt more like home than ever before. "I'm glad we're all working together," Say said, raising her cup. "To new beginnings." They all clinked their cups lightly, the afternoon sun shining warmly on Magnolia Court. Later that evening, Karen sat down to write a letter to the HOA newsletter. She wanted to share her experience not as a lecture, but as a story of growth and community. She wrote about the importance of communication, patience, and embracing change. About how a single misunderstanding had sparked conversations that brought neighbors closer. As she signed off, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was alive, filled with people willing to listen and work together. And sometimes, that made all the difference. Karen placed the letter on her desk and looked out the window, watching the gentle glow of porch lights come on one by one. The door to her own house stood open, just a crack, a symbol, not of vulnerability, but of welcome. Because in the end, the real key wasn't in the lock, it was in the willingness to connect.